Who owns Canada? Who owns the nation? This is a trick question. Not for the reason you suspect. But if you see it as a trick question, you probably are trying to own part of a nation, while fighting against others who you think own too much of it, or perhaps, or for those who you think do not own enough of it. Most persons see the nation as a big pie, that needs dividing up. Nations are part of the world. The world is an even larger pie that is divided up into nations. If we share the world, then we need to share the nation. If one pie is small, compared to other pies or of lower quality, why not move to another nation or pie and demand a more generous slice? Canada is a large pie with much fruit. It is a desirable pie to get a share of. But this sharing must invariably open up questions about who gets a share of the national pie, and who has the right to do the sharing? Generally, we assume that those in the nation have a right to a share of it, and it is the state that has the obligation to do the sharing. If the individual cannot get their share on their own, then the state has the obligation to make sure the sharing is done more fairly. But even if we accept this general way of looking at citizenship and the state, there will invariably be concerns over the size of the individual shares. No one actually thinks everyone ought to get an equal share. Such an idea is not even feasible, were it entertained. If the pie is shared today, what of those who arrive tomorrow? If someone has spent generations building up wealth, is it really fair they would get the same benefits as someone who just arrived in the country? The individual does not need the same share as a family, nor does the small family need as much as the larger. The person with severe health problems will require more resources than someone young and in good health. And so, there are many considerations to take into account as the sharing takes place. Those who have many generations in the nation will invariably believe they naturally must have more rights and a higher priority than a new immigrant. The legal in the country will feel they ought to have better access to the nation's resources than a criminal or migrant who has entered the nation illegally. What few, if any, think is that they have no right to anything. We own what we create, what we pour ourselves into. No one can deny this, and no one will deny this. No one will give up the right to their soul and energy, though some might dispute the rights of others to what they created. They might argue about what constitutes creation, but no one will argue they have no right to anything at all. The problem starts from people thinking there are things that were not created. For example, they think the world was not created, they might think the nation is not created, they might even think civilization was not created, in the sense that every element of civilization originated in the brains of individuals. There is no group or cooperative creation. Every thought ever formed was formed in a single mind. Every idea can be traced to a single source mind. But this mind that creates is not any mind. This mind is a particular kind of mind tied to a specific type of soul, and this soul is one of two kinds, and this mind belonged to one of two distinct races. Unfortunately, we have become accustomed to thinking of race as being determined by physical factors. This is a result of thinking humans are animals. It is apt to classify animals based on morphology. It is bizarre to try this same thing when dealing with humans. Doing so is a category error. Humans and animals are not the same kind of thing, and what works when dealing with animals has no relevance when dealing with humans. Whatever physical attribute we say typifies human beings, we can eliminate it and the person is still human. This is so true. There are groups who are active in ensuring persons who lack certain physical and even mental abilities are not deprived of their human rights. This goes as far as ensuring persons who are physically disabled still have the same freedom of movement as a person who is not physically disabled. The idea of transferring the essence of a person into a machine or making robot humans would be incomprehensible if humans were truly defined by various physical attributes. However, there are two sorts of persons. These two sorts divide into two races. Each race occupies a different reality, and each reality has a different understanding of ownership. This is important to understand. Analytical persons, and their truth is coherent. Intellectuals utilize deduction in seeking the truth. Idealists assert all certainties emerge from conceivable possibilities, where realism contends that all manifestable possibilities emerge from pre-existing certainties. Idealists believe reason is the best test of knowledge. Empiricists argue all knowledge is found in experience. The fundamental starting point for all analytical knowledge is not found in the senses or in experience, but instead can be traced back to some innate knowledge we are born with. In other words, intellectuals believe the mind is attracted to a non-physical source of truth. Whereas phenomenologists think everything we know has come to us through our five senses. The intellectual is grounded in ideas and the corruptible is grounded in the material. This might not seem to get us any closer to the issue of whom owns Canada. Yet if we apply these findings to the issue of ownership, we can see each viewpoint produces a totally different sense of ownership. The corruptible viewpoint attaches ownership to the physical. In this way of thinking, Canada is its geography. This might appear quite reasonable, but it produces the very same problem we encountered when we postulated human identity is attached to the physical body. One can remove a lake, or island, or even province, and what is left is just as much Canada as it was before. The corruptible view of identity is no better when applied to a nation than when applied to human beings. If everything is physical, then all we can own is physical. In the liberal view, we own our bodies and we own the physical geography of our country. Only such a claim is patently absurd. There is no feasible path to owning either. We cannot actually own our bodies or the nation, so we do proxy things, such as have the state represent the ownership of the land and our bodies, and we license it back from them. This is also patently absurd, but it is the only way we can own anything physical. It gives us legal ownership, but legal ownership is only ownership that exists by virtue of our ability to defend our claim by physical force. The state not only owns the nation but its subjects. We are subjects of the state and subject to its laws. These laws not only make us liable for the state's defense but to subject ourselves to its laws. We own ourselves only as the law permits as a legal right. But as said, this is absurd, because the law has no claim over a nation or us, that has merit. We give the state authority, and the state gives us a legal identity. It is only because we the people subject ourselves to the state that gives the state its authority. But the state is an abstraction. It does not really exist. Organizations and administrations are not a physical, they are entirely conceptual. It is only because we understand them as an organization, and in this context, as the state, that they can operate as the state. There is literally not such thing as ownership in a physical context. One cannot physically own anything. All that exists in the physical world is physical force, which is inherently destructive. Ownership in the profane Babylonian model is grounded in the application of physical force. Legal rights are the manifestation of the ability to kill the opposition. All legal rights are dependent on the ability of the holder of those rights to kill the opposition. There is no legal rights or law without the ability to inflict death and damage on the dissenter. But this brings us to the real problem: the state is parasitic. The law is parasitic. All those who operate under the aegis of naturalism are parasites. All of government, all of it, is make-work. Everything that exists was created by those who use their hands. Everything of value is made by those who created something. People are better off buying the good or service than not buying it. The state does not permit markets. The only headwork that is value in a market is what those who work with their hands are willing to buy, because it makes them more productive. The hand workers validate headwork by the sharing of the wealth they create. Head and hand work is a cooperative enterprise. Service work also supports the making of things by being involved in the distribution of things. If the system must force workers to donate or share what they create, and you are part of this, you are a criminal and part of a criminal conspiracy. So who owns Canada is answered simply by saying, it is the people. But Canada is not its geography and less its history. Canada is not a thing because it is immaterial. The British North American Act is more Canadian than all of its rocks and streams. Canada is a culture and a set of values. Canada is a shared vision and a mission. A person outside of the country who shares in the vision of Canada is more of a Canadian than someone who has lived their life here but who works to overthrow the culture. However, this is just the theory. In application, we are the person who owns a store that a criminal gang exploits to launder money through. We own it on paper, but we have no control over it. This is because we are veering left even as we profess to be on the right. Ownership is tantamount to control. Atheists understand this when it comes to our bodies. Atheists claim if they cannot abort children, then they lack ownership of their bodies. This is true, but on the other hand, owning their bodies in this context is owning the body inside, which is slavery. The arguments of the pro-abortion lobby only make sense if we look at the fetus as a thing which is the property of the body it exists in. But then who owns land? Who controls it? In fact, no one controls it. Land is always a contested item because while the state owns and regulates it, others must work and administrate it directly. Land ownership always comes with liabilities, because the ownership of land and other natural resources is a criminal enterprise. It cannot be legitimized. This is why if you argue with a liberal about ownership of other false claim, it will eventually get down to who has the greatest propensity to violence. Ownership in the liberal sense comes down to who has the greatest capacity to unleash violence on the opposition. Communists are at least well aware of this. Political power comes out of the barrel of a gun, Mao is reported to have said. All we can own, in a legitimate sense, is what we create. No one can dispute our ownership of what we create. In this sense, Canada is a political entity, concept. It is not land or anything physical, it is an idea. This is why its symbols are so important and why those who are pro-globalist hate the symbology that comes with nationalism. Canada was created by white men in the abstract and by white families in the cultural manifestation. Other groups joined in and embellished the idea of Canada, somewhat. But it was created by those whom we call settlers. Canada is owned by us who are its creators. We have the right to it because what it is, was formed by our heads and hands. We have the right to be gatekeepers to the idea and all of the culture that Canada encapsulates. No one has a right to infringe upon the culture of Canada, any more than they can infringe upon a copyrighted book or other intellectual property. Canada is its value, the value added to the assets created by God. This value has been stolen from us and from our ancestors, but we have the inalienable right to it. Equity belongs to its creator, as assets belong to the creator. Canada is its equity, not its assets, and is owned by the creators of the equity that we see as Canada.